Welcome to the third season of the Global Architect Alliance podcast with your founder, Jason Boyle. This season, we're going to be asking architects in countries around the globe, what is it really like to practice architecture in these countries? Over the season, we will uncover the differences and similarities to practicing the profession of architecture between different continents, countries and regions. Our fourth location is Lagos in Nigeria. Please share, subscribe and comment to support this channel. Now a word from our sponsors.
Sounds for Sleeping is a new dedicated YouTube and Instagram channel with relaxing ASMR videos to help you relax, study or sleep. Please see links in this podcast for free sounds ranging from 1 hour to 10 hours of sounds.
Welcome to the third season of the Global Architect Alliance. And our fourth guest is Edozie. Hi, Yem. How are you? And could you just introduce yourself and let me know where you are in the world and
Hi.
how long you've been on location? Hi.
Hi, Jason. Thanks so much for this opportunity to speak, and thanks for having me. My name is Edozie, as you said. I'm an architect practicing primarily in Lagos, Nigeria. So I'm going to be giving you the West African sub-region experience for what it's like to practice.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think my first real question to you is, I really want to understand how long does it take to qualify to become an architect in Nigeria? And it's I'm just pairing that with maybe UK. It's 7 years. So how long does it take in Nigeria?
Yeah. I mean, generally here it's around about the same. It's actually 6 years, but because there usually issues here and there in terms of the administration of the educational system, it spans to the 7th year. So it's probably around about 7 years to gain qualification.
Great.
Yeah. So it's more or less the same, really, as around the world.
And how many years of study and practice is it? Is it split like that? Sort of.
Yeah. So what it is it's kind of like a 4-year pre-professional degree, and then you have a couple of years of post-professional degree. So at the end of the 6th year, you have a master's with a specialization in the built environment, probably architecture, obviously, where you can then springboard off either to go into academia or practice itself.
No, it's and that's just interesting. I didn't really, they are them two routes, to go from qualifying as an architect, and you can go into education and go into practice. I'm guessing you went straight into practice.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I did my first master's degree in Nigeria, University of Lagos. So that was my first post-professional degree. And then I did another master's degree in advanced architectural design at Columbia. And then at that point, I kind of decided to basically come back. I dabbled into a couple of multinationals before I made up my mind to start my practice, Bruuda Architects. So
Great.
Yeah.
No,
so that was my journey anyway.
Well, we're going to get more into that, and I think one of the things that everyone's always interested in, and it's a difficult question to answer, but so I'll answer it this way: it's sort of, what is the average sort of salary that an architect can make fully qualified?
Oh my goodness!
So it's how we sort of bound it, I think.
Yeah.
Like 5 years experience, average. I guess that depends on location as well.
Absolutely. There are different bands to it, right? Straight out of school, so to speak, very raw.
Yeah.
Salary is really around about $500 a month.
Yeah.
That's which is not great, but there's certain aspects of context when you apply it. You realize that that's about as good as it's gonna get, for someone that's kind of like fresh out of school. Yeah, so it's tough in the beginning, um, uh, and it's I would say from our time, I think it's gotten progressively more difficult, because we've had a couple of devaluations in the currency here. So, and when that happens, effectively, what that means is that the earning power of the workforce literally drops. So every time that happens, the earning power drops, not necessarily the skill set or the capacity to deliver, but the earning power. So I think we've had that a few times, maybe 3 or 4 times over the years. So now we're at a point where it's thereabouts about $500 USD,
Mm.
which is not really good. So we try to be as encouraging as possible by being very competitive in our salary structure, and we also try to encourage through learning and through value add, and mentorship for the guys that are coming in, fresh out. So there's a lot of value in there that we try to throw in, because again, we can't literally the band exists, we can't break the band. Now, interestingly, when you go just beyond that to thereabouts your 5-year experience professional, someone that maybe has just got their license or about to get their license, it's better, but it's still not competitive on a global scale. So I would say that is just north of maybe $1,000 a month in terms of salary, which is not great for someone that has that level of experience. But once you cross that barrier, then it really opens up, because what you have is once the licensure, in fact, even pre-licensure, the mindset becomes very entrepreneurial, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It has its positives and its negatives, but at least it then offers up a lot of opportunity to take certain decisions for these guys early on in their careers. So I would say you could literally get, depending on the nature of the brief, depending on the nature of the client, and depending on the individual's ability to create value in the transaction, you could literally get up to anywhere from $10 to $100,000, really. It could, it's that wide. But again, those top end projects are not as frequent, or not nearly frequent enough for the volume of new entrants into the industry. So that is like I would say a realistic this depiction of what the market is like. Interestingly, though, just to touch on that, if you were to do sort of like a poll or an analysis of where the mindset is at of the average architect, between in that early stage, you'd find that right from school, right now, they're thinking like entrepreneurs, and they want to get out on their own, just so that they can leapfrog that early experience of not having the right kind of commercial or economic compensation for their work, and which is what I meant when I said that there's a good side to it and a bad side to it. So it's good that they're thinking entrepreneurially, but it's bad that they're losing a lot of the experience that you gain when you work in an architectural office. And that is a problem. That is a real big problem right now in practice.
Yeah, and I guess that will that affects that sort of when someone comes into a practice, into an office like yours, and they've leapfrogged that stage, they're almost going to be less valuable, or they may take more training to get them up to speed. Would you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've come to be able to recognize that mindset, and we tend to stay away from it as much as possible, because it's an entire process to help someone understand that they don't know as much as they think they do, before they get back to that ground zero of, okay, you know what, I'm an open book, I'm a blank slate. Let's see how we can, create value for each other, and collaborate properly. And that process is time that a lot of practices, just can't afford. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely get it, and I think that's even relevant to the UK. And there was something that you said that was interesting about the devaluation of the currency, which was what I was speaking to Ramez about in Pakistan. He had the same issues. That devaluation meant that architects generally were a lot worse off than they used to be, a year or two ago.
Yeah, it's so true. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, I mean, there are people that are there's the anti-globalization narrative now that's, trending. But the fact of the matter is we live in a global world, so to speak, and there must be a competitive skill set. The application of your skill set has to be attractive and valuable, or deemed as valuable on a global scale, because everyone literally is competing with everyone else. And when you think about that, you then realize that based on location, in practice, some people or some groups, some subsets are shortchanged for their value proposition. And it is what it is. It's really, really difficult. I mean, it's difficult not just from the perspective of the individual as an employee, but also from the business itself, because you realize that even as an entity, even as an organization, you are competing globally in terms of projects, and you have directly or indirectly have to experience those challenges, those fiscal challenges, in terms of currency, directly or indirectly. It's inescapable. So yeah.
Okay, my next question is, what software do you use to design your buildings? I put this into context of, do you use different software for different phases of your work?
Oh yeah, totally. So early on, this is a fantastic question. Interestingly, right? Back in my school days, the idea, the mentality was to focus on the ability to draw, right? So it wasn't the emphasis on technical skill was in fact, it was de-emphasized. Let me put it that way. It was not really well respected by the professors back then, and it was kind of like drilled mentally into us to draw by hand, and that experience of sketching and conveying your ideas through the drawing, the manual process is artisanal almost in terms of its nature and the way it's appreciated. And that's how we came up, right? And in between then and now, there's all CAD took off. CAD had already started coming into prominence, but then it got to a stage where AutoCAD was like the thing, right? And then, before AutoCAD really took on in this part of the world, Revit came into the scene, right? So it gave a lot of people learned Revit directly and sort of like skipped AutoCAD. We didn't. Yeah, we didn't. So, and again, almost in the same way, there are nuances in Revit that if you haven't experienced proper training in AutoCAD, you don't really like your line weights and how you use your line weights, which again comes from, sketching and your appreciation for pens and your penmanship in sketching.
Yeah.
So that journey, I mean, if you follow that journey from like, the physical sketching, the manual sketching to your penmanship and then to your AutoCAD and then to your Revit is a fantastic transition that adds every stage of that, kind of adds to one's process. Now, for us as a practice, we're primarily Revit when it comes to documentation. I would say stage 2B, what we refer to as stage 2B, which is like your second stage of scheme design down like Revit. But we always start with sketching. It's very, very important. The manual process, of just having a blank piece of paper and expressing yourself when you're thinking about the site boundaries and constraints. So we start with that process. We take it into Revit, and from there it's just been on. So we've totally cut out AutoCAD from our own workflow, and then once we're in Revit, it's iteration, and then we take it into our modeling software, depending on the nature of the brief, depending on the nature of the project, and then we take it to our renderers, Octane, and the likes, where we get out our photorealistics to close out the first, sort of like the first phase, and then it's documentation there on in.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed as well with people who maybe jump straight to Revit is, when they come and print off the drawings, and like you were saying, you don't understand line weights, or you don't understand, going back to, when I used to use pen and pencil and then create beautiful drawings, they print them off the printer and the drawings just have no beauty to them. That obviously is not too important to a contractor on site, but to you used to create such beautiful drawings, clear drawings, and understand the hierarchy of information, and that's kind of a little bit being lost.
It really has. It really has. And to your point, just to segue back to something we were talking about earlier, in how the guys coming out of school now are very entrepreneurial in their thinking, which is, like, as we said, it's kind of good and it's kind of bad. It's also because of this technology and how they utilize this technology and how easy it is for them to get to a photorealistic level, where it's easily interpreted by the average client, the average end user as, yes, that's what I want to, I like the way this looks, and that process, they haven't fully grasped how a lot of those, components can be built, if they can be built, and the logistical challenges in that execution. You really need to grind through that, to have an understanding of that. And unfortunately, we live in a world today where things are like so instantaneous, and because of that, the guys that can give that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, because things are so instantaneous, the guys that can give you those kinds of images get the deals, they get the projects, right? but there are always challenges when it comes to execution. So it's a process in itself.
No, I fully agree. I could talk about that subject on a whole podcast, you know.
Yeah.
No, it's fantastic, and it's so I'm really interested in your practice and what kind of work that your practice does. So if you can just maybe run through the types of projects you
Oh yeah.
generally work. Yeah.
So really, we do a little bit of everything. So we do residential, we do hospitality, we do commercial. Right now, we're doing an 80-room hotel in Abuja, Maitama, Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria. That's a really interesting one. So it's ongoing. Been traveling a little bit for that one, and there've been all sorts of challenges in terms of our the logistical problems that have come about from weather challenges and climate issues about that, and I think maybe we'll touch on that later. But
Yes.
so we have that. We have there's a beautiful project we're doing in Geneva, along Baudelaire. It's a single-family home, a small, beautiful project. I'm doing for a friend of mine.
Okay.
And we used to work together. So I had a brief stint in the oil and gas industry, and we were friends ever since then. And the time came along for him to build his own home, and he knows what we can do, and so it was fairly easy to secure that. So we have that, and and we're doing the domestic airport for Zamfara State, state in northern Nigeria. Yeah, so that's another interesting project as well. So I mean, we're quite busy as a practice. The key thing for us is an application of our design ethos, the way we think about design, the way we think our approach from ab initio, from concept right through to execution, and even post completion and occupancy, and the experience that those kinds of projects leave behind is really, really important to us in how we choose our projects and how we execute.
No, absolutely. And this leads on to my next question. Really, it's how do you generally win work? I mean, there's a multitude of ways. I'm guessing reputation is the main ones. How do you win?
So I mean, obviously there's the whole idea of social media as a tool for architects today, and I agree it's a tool. I believe it's a very powerful tool, and it needs to be truly understood before it's wielded, because it's also very dangerous. So I'll give you an example. Back in the day, I remember one of my professors, he kind of forced an entire studio to prepare work in black and white. Because he wasn't convinced that his students understood how to use color properly. And that kind of stuck with me. I think that was brilliant. We didn't really understand it at the time, but the discipline and the rigor it takes to appreciate your work without the gloss, without the fluff, takes you to another level. And I think it's also the same thing in terms of social media. As they say, the internet never forgets. And one of the things I always tell the guys here is that, our work is our legacy. And, because of it, we need to really choose our projects carefully and choose how we want that work to be interpreted. So, for example, with us, earlier in the day, we did a lot of retrofits, particularly in the commercial space, right? And then we kind of transitioned into more dwelling units and single family homes. And then we've kind of gone on to, a substantial portion of our work, it really is consultancy for multinationals and oil and gas.
Right.
And how that process was very organic, and the fact that we controlled our narrative from the very beginning allowed it to be very organic, because we weren't seen as pigeonholed into any one space. So by being careful about how we utilize social media, it has allowed us the flexibility to duck and dive as the industry has changed and evolved over the years. So right now, I would say substantial, well more than 60-70% of our work is in the oil and gas industry and consulting for the oil and gas industry. If we had come out at some point as, say, for example, specialists in luxury housing, which we do, we wouldn't have been top consideration for that other kind of business.
I'm with
you. Because we would have been pigeonholed and perceived as a certain kind of architect. So the flexibility and that dynamism to be able to adapt to the industry is afforded us because we've been very careful about social media. And so in trickles we come out there. But more than anything else, to your point, it's really about reputation, about the kind of work we do, and kind of like on a word of mouth basis. Classic example is, like I said, the friend of mine whose house we're doing in Geneva was literally based on relationship, and that again, harkens back to my point about it being really a global industry where we're all playing in, and one has to be very mindful about the skill sets we use and the skill sets we develop, and the direction we go in, because things change very, very quickly these days.
Yeah, you've got to adapt. You've got to adapt to international markets and trends. No, it's fascinating, and maybe just looking at the projects you've got based in Nigeria, I'm interested in what sort of contracts that you do you use. Is it, and we have the saying in the UK, we have traditional contracts, which is like a JCT form of contract where the architect's in control of full build, and then we have design and build where you get planning, and then it's handed over to the builder, and then you're novated or they novate another architect into the build. So it's just understanding really of what type of contracts mainly are used in Nigeria.
So ironically, we tend to adopt the JCT to a substantial extent. So what it is once again, they're different bands. So there are projects that are pure consultancy, and the NIA and ARCON have a scale of fees, the professional bodies here, that are applied to those contracts, not often adhered to, but at least they're applied. And so that's for the pure consultancy. We see more a tendency for the second band, there's the design and build. So there's a tendency for it to be more of an all-encompassing engagement. So it's kind of like, okay, you're the architect, you design it, you build it, execute, which is more straightforward in terms of contract administration, so that the client has an understanding that they're dealing with just the one person. It on paper appears to be more lucrative, but from experience, it's not always the case. There are a lot of liability issues as well, but it's a very popular band here. The design and build, very, very popular here. And then you have the third band, which is kind of like what you were speaking about, that a lot of developers try to use here, where you're engaged as an architect to provide a very specific service at literally almost any point along the course of the development project. And then once that engagement is delivered or done, you get paid, and your involvement in the project is really at an end. I have my issues with Band 3, for sure. I think it tends to, one of the challenges is, even from a global standpoint, we find that architects are kind of like pushed to the periphery of the project, right? Especially when it involves financial components. So we don't want that, right? We don't. It's not the best. So Band 3 is not something we encourage. Even though, because a lot of people are looking for the work, like for example, those kinds of guys that are fresh out of school and want to try their hand, at having their own project, tend to go for Band 3 because they are under the umbrella of the developer. So the developer takes all the risk and all of that and says, okay, you have some nice, interesting designs, come and do this in this way, and you get paid. For the developer, it works because they manage their exposure to the consultant from a cost perspective, and then, for the guys, it also works because they're on projects. Some of these projects are high ticket projects as well. But in the end, what we find is that the Band A is far, far, far superior because it places a premium on the intellectual property of the architect and the intellectual value proposition of the architect as a consultant. And it's more professional, it's tidier, and the fact of the matter is there's a scale of project above which really it can only be Band 1. And that's another point I was going to make, that is the band that I believe we as architects need to be working in. I mean, if you think about it, here, I think we have a housing deficit of about 20 million in Nigeria, and I think the global is something like maybe 100 million or so. So if my stats serve me correctly, I think we need to build like around about just under 100,000, maybe 96, 97,000 units a year before 2030. Yes, before 2030, right? To cater for 3 billion people. Now, the truth is, as architects, I mean, I don't know what the global number is, but I know here there are less than 5,000 registered architects in Nigeria. Less than 5,000. We are not going to be doing 20 million homes. We're not going to be doing 96,000 homes a year. We're not going to solve that housing deficit crisis alone. So we need to think about ways to engage the broader spectrum of stakeholders, bring them in, open the door without losing control. So I think there's a control issue at play. And we need to be careful. I mean, I do understand it 100%, but when you really, really think about it, in terms of housing, and again, we've kind of like, sorry to derail us, we're kind of like talking about housing now, but in terms of housing, it's such a huge issue that we need to let go a little bit and focus on more of the projects, the higher end projects that can pay us the fees, right? That can allow us to emphasize on our intellectual property, which is the Band 1 we were speaking about. That's where we need to be, right? And kind of like loosen the reins a little bit on the housing, because it is a problem. And I think my opinion is that that's where prop tech and technology comes into play. There's definitely a way where we can utilize technology as trained architects to propagate our housing ideas, concepts, strategies on a global scale, solve this problem without losing control, and free up bandwidth to focus on the bigger projects that need an architect, right? I mean, back in the day, we had those. I don't know if you remember those 300 housing plans in a book, 500 bungalow plans or something like that, or 1,000 plans in one book. That was then. Now you have a higher grade of quality and specificity on Pinterest, right? Yeah. So you can literally go on Pinterest or one of these sites and pick out a design that you just say is my dream home. You don't need an architect for that. And that is the challenge, because we're fighting against almost an insurmountable tide. You can't start a meeting or an engagement with a prospective client trying to justify your value proposition, trying to argue that, yeah, you have your Pinterest, but I'm better, or I'm going to give you more value. We need to be able to let some things go, and at the same time free up so that the bigger projects that absolutely cannot be executed without the input of an architect, we can focus on those and gain good value.
Yeah, I think again that's something that Ramaz was saying in Pakistan. There's so few architects, qualified architects there, that you've got to, have focus on where you best can add value. And that's almost exactly what you're saying. No, really interesting. I hadn't really appreciated that. So that's wonderful. My next question is coming onto the environmental challenges that your country's facing and designing for. And I think we want to in particular look at the recent inland flooding and in Nigeria. It's so it's a big subject, but it's I'd be just interested on how you're tackling these issues, and what impact is it having.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really sad. I think altogether we have about over the last 3 months, for 3 months or so, because it was a gradual process, the flooding. I think we had about 1 million people displaced, and close to about 1,000 recorded lives lost. So, I mean, really, really sad. Like I mentioned earlier, so basically what happened is, when the water levels rise at different strategic dams, one of them is actually outside of Nigeria, in Cameroon, the water needs to be released. When the pressure gets too high, the water needs to be released. And when the water is released, it has nowhere to go except into these, flood-prone regions or high-risk regions in terms of flooding. Now, this year was particularly bad. I think one of the worst in well over 10 years or so. And, it was really, really bad in particular regions, around central parts of Nigeria, and then, further down south towards the coast. And, when you really think about it, at a scale where you're talking about 1 million people displaced, and this is, okay, in fairness, it's not something that happens all the time, but it's something that we've come to understand can happen. And of course, we understand with climate change, I think even in Nigeria, we have something like 3 to 5 millimeter sea level rise year on year. That is the standard, on average. So when you think about this, this is not something new. This is not something that, just, happened unexpectedly. So for me, there's a lot of blame and responsibility that lies on government, but I don't think 100% of that, should be the case. I think it is also fundamentally a design issue. This isn't just a government issue. This is a design issue as well, and how we think about how we adapt our buildings to these problems that are becoming more and more prevalent every day. And so what are the strategies that are being employed? Are we changing our code in those areas? What's the building code? What are we? There were regions, particularly down south, where whole floors. So we're talking about like maybe 2.7 to 3.2 were submerged. So the entire ground floor was submerged, and these are really expensive homes. So you can imagine what the damage is like. So it's not just, of course, there's a tremendous impact and pressure on infrastructure and what that can do to alleviate these issues. That is for sure. But also, we as architects need to be very proactive in our thinking. So, for example, in our practice, one of the things that we've been doing for years is whenever we have a project that has a basement, or in an area that, for example, is within a certain distance from the coastline, we make sure, at basement level, we have a submersible pump, at least 2 horsepower, on standby. That's just what we do. We spec it, it's part of it, it has to be there, regardless of whether there's any flooding or not, regardless of the level of detailing or tanking that the basement might have, because we know what, this is our environment. This is the reality of the world that we live in. So those types of strategies, we all know about Corbusier and the idea of his pilotis and all of that. How do we adapt that? How do we implement things like that in the way we design for our regions today? So, of course, we're doing a little bit of writing on that, which we plan to share with the stakeholders in our government agencies about our recommendations of what to do and how we can play our own part. But we need more of those kinds of platforms and outreach to bring, the practices that care together, so we can prefer a long-term solution.
Be interesting as well, just to know on that one before we leave that subject. It's a huge subject. Again, in the UK, we have these flood maps, which are quite detailed, so you can see, that if you want to develop on that piece of land, it's at a higher risk, and therefore you might not get building insurance. Do you have them sort of real detailed flood maps?
Well, yeah, we do have flood maps, thank God. But again, these change ever so frequently. So I gave you an example. This is probably, I think these are the worst floods on record. That's my opinion. It's debatable. They say they're the worst floods in the last 10 years. For me, whatever statistics and data we had in those maps are outdated.
Yeah.
They're obsolete now because, we've never seen it this bad. It's so bad that, there are going to be food crisis challenges within the next 3 to 6 months by maybe second quarter 2023. How we're going to mitigate those, how those are going to impact the way we live as a society and in the country, and quite possibly even on a global scale in terms of food shortages. We don't quite know, but acres of farmland have been decimated, and those crops ruined from this flooding. So it's not just about having the data, but because of how much our world literally is changing. I mean, we have COP27 happening around about this period, and some very outlandish statements that were made. I think there was some headline about we're digging a hole straight to hell. I don't know if you saw that. Really extreme. It's not funny anyway. I mean, it's funny. It's not. At the same time, it's not. It's a serious issue, and I think there's a little bit of sensationalism in that, but it's not to be taken for granted. I think the situation is really, really bad. I think we are not heading as fast in the right direction as we should be, and so ultimately, if we keep on at this pace and doing what we're doing, it will be insurmountable eventually. So our data sets are literally changing right before our eyes. So it's really beyond the case of an awareness, because the data is there purely for awareness, at least in terms of building application processing, right? But in terms of overarching strategy and the resilience of our communities and the resilience of our buildings, right? We're not making the necessary moves. We aren't. We're making assumptions because, and I say this a lot, our industry is always one of the first to get hit whenever there's any shock to our systems, and is always the last to get, the benefits of any windfalls, right? So we cannot afford, as architects being at the forefront of the industry, to be reactionary. We need to be proactive in our thinking, and so we need to really start to put forward radical ideas and strategies in terms of how to solve these types of projects. There's a project that we're doing, a recreational kind of park off the coast of Badagry, which is like really close to the edge of Lagos. And very beautiful project by the water, overlooking the water. And ironically, one of our design strategies was to put a lot of the buildings on pilotis, right? So it creates this ambience of literally floating at water level, which is fascinating. But again, it solves a major problem. So in the event that we have challenges with our floodplains, again, in the event that we have challenges with our rising water levels, we already have a solution to that, right? We don't have to think retroactively. And again, when we think about things from that perspective, when we think about, one of our ethos is the embrace of the malignant. So malignant is in the sense of things that ordinarily are bad for you, or bad for your building, or bad for your community. When you embrace that and you force that into your mix, into your program and your strategy, then you create something that's completely new and fresh when you force that integration of that dynamism. So rather than try to, for example, what typical people would have done would have been to build a levee, sort of like to keep the water out, which would eventually fail because that's not long-term thinking. We embrace it, and now we have a completely new type of programmatic experience happening underneath these buildings and around the pilotis, right? That we can be creative about and think about, a new way to engage people, whilst also tackling, the issues with climate that we're experiencing in the region. So we need to really be active and bold as architects in how we challenge these problems that are coming towards our built environment head first. So that's our strategy. That's the way we think about that.
No, absolutely. Incredible. My next question really is also looking into an issue in Nigeria that that's apparent with building collapses. And these seem to be happening on a more frequent basis.
Yeah.
Could you just go into what's happening?
Yeah. So it's another tough one. Again, and unfortunately, these happen more and more frequently, and predominantly in Lagos. Now, reason Lagos is, the fifth largest economy in Africa, right? So it's understandable that shocks to the system, shocks to the built environment would happen in Lagos as opposed to other parts, for example, of the country. So that's on the one hand. Let's not lose sight of that fact. However, people's lives are being lost. I mean, there was one that happened not too long ago. A 21-story building collapsed, and unfortunately, I think around about almost 50 people lost their lives, including the developer of the project. May their souls rest in peace. Now, for me and the way we think about this, and I'm going to touch on that in a second. But first, when you think about why this is happening, you cannot untether this from the pressures on our infrastructure. And I must say, for a nation, a country, and a city like Lagos that is as potentially viable from a commercial standpoint as it is, not enough investment has been made in infrastructure. Infrastructure is by far the most valuable form of real estate in the world as an investment, not even just as an asset class. And, that we have all these beautiful buildings going up and around and not enough thought and depth is being applied to infrastructure is really a disservice that needs to be corrected. We have a few projects in Abuja, and I can tell you categorically that infrastructure development in Abuja is substantially much more, let me say, at a much more advanced stage than Lagos. And Lagos has a lot of catching up to do in that regard. So when you have pressures in terms of infrastructure, whether you like it or not, because again, a lot of the infrastructure in Lagos was built, kind of like around more than 40 years ago, right? You can even see it from the style of these things. So there's a lot of wear and tear that is experienced, and the necessary mitigants to manage that haven't really been put in place, or haven't been put in place fast enough, or their impact isn't being felt fast enough. And so you tend to start to see cracks in the city, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's on the one hand. Now, when you juxtapose that with what I call the abuse, the developer abuse, right? Which we see more and more in this side of the world, it becomes a very, very dangerous scenario. So what is this? What is the developer abuse? Basically, we know how difficult or challenging it is to become an architect. The barrier for entry into that profession is very, very high in terms of sacrifice, commitment, and this, that, and the other. For a developer, the barrier for entry is very, very low. So literally anyone that has some extra change, anyone and their uncle that has some extra change can decide to become a developer and have absolute control from kind of like a gestalt view of the build process for any project, any kind of project, any scale of project, because they control the finances. So that is very dangerous. And so what you have almost, and again, we seem to be going full circle. So it goes back to what we were saying about education in the profession, and what it means to become an architect, and what it takes to become an architect, and what it takes to transition into practice, right? We have developers that even go straight to school, right? So we're talking about, students that haven't even finished their education, but can put together a set of drawings and a few renders and engage them, pay them a pittance just to create the narrative of a build project. And so you see what I'm saying? So it becomes really dangerous when you have that sort of a mix. Like in the case of the project that I was talking about that unfortunately collapsed, we have, because several investigations were done, it was a really, really big issue here, both in terms of the NIA was involved, Corin, which is the Association of Structural Engineers, was involved, Archon, the state was involved. It wasn't taken lightly at all because of the lives that were lost. And after that, it became apparent that, a lot of compromises were made on the part of the developer, right? A lot of compromises were made in terms of the nature of the consulting team, right, that was engaged, and even they distanced themselves from the project several times before the project collapsed, but it just kept on going. I mean, it was 21 stories, and they had sold. You see my point? People had bought these, well-to-do people that can afford these had bought these. They had paid. They were looking forward to the project completion, not knowing that their lives were at risk. So, it's a very sad situation. But, for me, my belief is that for us to see an end to it or a substantial decline to it, there needs to be a, sort of like an end-to-end involvement of all the stakeholders. So let me give you an example. If an individual, let's say one of the units cost $1 million in that project, if an individual was going to pay $1 million for a project, unbuilt, unfinished, he has the right to demand to see the certification of every single person that participated in building that building.
Yeah, like a golden
right?
thread. Yeah.
Absolutely. He has the right. Now, if he demands that, and if that becomes over time a prerequisite for you to be able to sell your project, then you also start to think as a developer, I need to get a certain caliber of contractor, a certain caliber of consultant to work on this project, because I need to be able to sell it at the end. Because if I don't have these kinds of people on this project, I'm going to be stuck with a unit that, I can't sell, or I'm going to have to sell at a substantially discounted rate. Because they don't want to lose money. They're going to do the right thing. And so it trickles down even from the contractors involved. When they know that they're not going to get to build a certain scale of project if they don't have the right type of artisanal hands on it, when the consultants think about it that they're not going to get a certain type of brief if they don't have the right type of registration, or they keep their registration up to date, or they keep their continual learning up to date, everyone's going to pull their bootstraps up and get to work. So there's a whole process. I'm actually writing a paper on it right now that, I think we can, if applied, we can, be able to really create sort of like a paradigm shift in the way people think about this. And if we can do that and circle back, then it becomes, at the end of the day, the end user of these projects, the clients, the guys that are going to occupy these spaces, they have all the power. They have all the power. And ironically, they're at the most risk. So it takes we all need to take responsibility, right? If I need to pay an extra $100,000 to be sure that what I'm paying for is of a certain standard, I'm going to pay.
Yeah.
Just so I'm sure, just to be able to be sure that what I'm paying for has been built properly, has followed all the guidelines, has followed all the specifications, and I'm happy for it. And there needs to be a sign off. There needs to be a sign off of everybody. And this is a really, really interesting point, because that sign off has value, right? Take, for example, our professional seals, the REBA seal, the NIA seal, the ARCON seal. That seal has value beyond the occupancy of that project. So if the guy that pays $1 million or $1,100,000 USD for his dwelling unit, right, decides to sell because there's an uptick of the market, he should be able to charge a premium because he can present that seal that you and I have, and we have participated in that project. And in fact, we should be able to get a commission on that project on account of that seal, all the way down the line, regardless of how many times that project is sold. Because at the end of the day, right, if the value is there and everyone gains value, the trickle down is natural. No one needs to be greedy, right? But the necessary people need to take responsibility for their role and their stake in the entire process.
And I would also add to that, the banks who are financing the developers should insist on having that sign off. That if the developer that goes to the banks to borrow the money and their insistence on having that level of quality and sign off, then it helps, doesn't it? It helps with everything.
Oh yeah, it does. It does. And it's almost like borrowing from the concept of LEED certification, right? One of your FANGs, like Google or Apple, are not going to, or let me put it this way, they will gladly, because of the size of those companies, engage in payment of a premium, how many times over, 4x, 5x, just to know that, or to be able to say publicly that they are thinking about the environment in a certain way, and in the way they engage with vendors, and the way they engage with contractors and things like that. Everything they do is of a certain level of thought. And to be able to say that, they have no problem paying 2x, 3x, 4x for whatever value it is. And so we need to bring that mindset in terms of LEED certification and apply it to literally everything else in terms of the quality assurance of our buildings and our build form.
Oh, great. Absolutely fantastic. And I think my next question, maybe it's different now. We'll go on to culture, and I'm really interested in the culture of practice. So what cultural issues do you encounter on a day-to-day basis when designing and constructing buildings?
So culture is a great one. I would say one of the biggest problems we have is the mindset of this kind of hyper westernization of our buildings and our build form. And really, it's no one's fault. It's just the way it has unfolded. But what we tend to see is that, again, it's all linked. It's all tied together. So it goes back to that idea of, I saw this on the internet, or I saw, people are very visual. Because they're very visual, they see something and they decide that it's applicable in a completely different context. They don't see it in the context of where it is. That's where as our knowledge and training and experience as architects comes into play, they see it in isolation. I think, I love the way that looks. Take that and just put it on my site. Is that possible? And so there's a huge challenge in that from a cultural perspective. Fortunately, people are becoming more discerning, and so it's changing very, very slowly. And with every project, we also try to sort of educate and enlighten our client base on these issues, so that when they walk in with that kind of a mindset in terms of what they think their building should look like, and we're done, it's totally different, right? And they are very appreciative of the fact that it's totally different from what they initially expected. Most of that, ties back to concepts of identity, and what that means. We as Africans and as Nigerians in practice are still grappling with what that looks like, and there's so many conversations and so many debates that are ongoing about it as a challenge. There are camps that are Pan-Africanist. There are camps that are anti-Pan-Africanist because they like to focus on the individuality of each of these subcultures and nations and that. I'm somewhere in between in my thinking, but I'm definitely of the opinion that it's becoming more clear that we have to proactively think about our identity and solve that conundrum of our identity. There's this sort of trending thing that goes on here now about Afro minimalism, it's called. So it's kind of like your minimalist Western architecture, but with an Afro thing attached to it, and I'm highly suspicious of that, and I'll explain why. Because I think the easiest way to explain this really is music, right? So the African music now has sort of come of age in the sense that it's very, very popular. We have what's called Afro beats. That's everybody loves that. Everybody knows all the artists and loves the music and all of that. Now, what I find interesting is the term Afro beats, because by definition, what it implies is that beats is intrinsically un-African, and so you have to qualify the beats with Afro to explain what you're listening to or what you're hearing. I believe it's this very same thing with Afro minimalism. When you think about that, it's almost to say that there is no intrinsic African architecture stylistically. You have to qualify it with an Afro. And I think we have that problem because we've not been allowed over time, over many, many, many years, to mature and express that identity. Eventually it will happen because we've seen it happen in other much quicker spheres of creativity, like design, like music, fabric design and all of that. So eventually it will happen. But I believe that therein lies where culturally we can extract who we are and express it. So I've done quite a bit of research into it myself, and I've come to find that there's a phenomenon of fractalism that runs through African culture and touches virtually every sphere of creativity. So, for example, the fractalism and the geometric forms happen in the way we organized our spaces in pre-colonial times. It's there. It's a fact. It's in the way the women braid their hair. There's a geometrical pattern in there that has tendencies of fractalism. It's there in language. It's there in fabric. We see it in Ghanaian kente. We see it in Nigerian adire. We see it in Nigerian akwacha from the southern part of Nigeria. It's there. And when you are able to sort of aggregate these things, even us as architects can see where we fall, where we really belong, right? Because we use these other creativity facets of creativity as our guide to understand what it really means to be African. And so if we can distill that, the moment we can distill that from a cultural perspective, right, it becomes very, very clear and apparent what our architecture is about. And I'm a firm believer that those fractal patterns, mathematical geometric patterns, in terms and expressed in color and shape and frequency, are definitely where we lie. You see it more and more every day. I guess probably it's a deeper conversation that we will have, Jason. But yeah. So I believe that that's where we lie, and it's a long journey to sort of shift the mindset from that, microwave dinner type of give me that, I saw that, to let's follow the process and unearth something really, really special.
Wow, what an answer to that question. Okay, my next question to you is: are you a member of a professional body?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so I'm a member of the NIA, which is the Nigerian Institute of Architects. I'm a member of ARCON, which is the Architects Registration Council of Nigeria. So it's sort of like how you have your RIBA. So you have the registration and the association. The ARB, exactly. It escaped me. The ARB and the RIBA. So we have that. I'm an associate member of the AIA as well, and then a few smaller bodies here and there that we feel kind of like along the lines of our thinking and our mindset and what we're passionate about.
And just be interested, because there's a lot of people, who are members of certain professional bodies. So I'm interested in how your professional body helps you. Is it with continuing professional development? Is it, what sort of ways do they really help you?
Well, yeah. I mean, we have all of that. We have CDPs as per normal. We have occasional meet and greets, symposiums here and there. But the truth is, there's so much more that the organizations and the associations can do that has been left untouched. Here, I think the will is there. The resources aren't always there, but I believe that collectively. So what we see here is there. Every now and then, we tend to see kind of like a rival body try to spring up, a subset here and there. And the reason is because of the fact that they feel that the main body is a little bit ineffectual, or is not yielding the results that are, that the people are crying out for, or that are demanded. So we see that, and then rather than move forward, there's a lot of, sideways movement, agitation against each other. It's heavily politicized. So I'm suspicious of the the bodies as a whole now, and I say this to the younger guys in the office because they're always trying to get registered or to re-register, and we help wherever we can, we mentor whenever we can, and but they're not the value that they can be reaping. It's really just still scratching the surface. These are very, very powerful organizations and lobbying groups, right, that can move the government in different directions, for good or for bad. And we don't see them or hear their voice enough. And it could be that it's because of the people, or it could be that it's because of the way the associations are set up. But I suspect it's really a combination of both, and it would need perhaps not sweeping change, but just being bolder. I think us just being bolder, because we can demand change from the government in any given direction, because we have the competence and the skill set to do so, right? No one else in Nigeria can speak on issues pertaining to architecture better than the Architectural Association. That is a fact. So if we're not constantly engaging the government at all times, then we're not going to be moving the narrative of the issues we have forward. No one's going to do it for us.
Absolutely, and I'd say that applies to the UK as well. Absolutely, same thing. So that's incredible. Sounds like you need to run for president.
Oh my Lord, I don't know. There are not enough days. There are not enough hours in the day as is, Jason. You know that.
That's a perfect run into my, my next question is, where do you stand on this? I think it's been in the last kind of 12 to 18 months. It's been a really big issue in the UK and in the profession about the long working hours culture. I think what I mean by that is it's been discussed a lot more and challenged by the first architectural union that we've got in the UK now. So it's just your understanding of the long working hours and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean,
you're a practice owner, so it's
No, look, I'll be honest. More often than not, we have no choice. What we try to do is to make sure that even at the executive level or management level, the staff don't feel abandoned. So many a time, if we need to, I will be very much on the issue as well. At least for if nothing else, for the optics, so that that mindset of the cavalry and the infantry, we try not to let that be. It is not part of our culture, and we don't want that to be part of our culture. So as much as possible, we try to lead by example. However, is it a good thing? No, it's not. It's certainly not something it's not a great thing. And it's something we try to dial down from and be less involved in as a practice. And I think we've been successful, particularly post-COVID, at implementing that mindset of well-being. Right, the well-being of the architects, their mental state, ways to set down from the pressures of work, and having a decent enough reward mechanism for the work. That's on the one hand. On the other, I think fundamentally there have always been issues with the way our profession is structured, because when you really think about it, there's so few architects, and there's so much architectural work that needs to be done that, architects on paper should be some of the wealthiest people in the world. That's the truth. Because it is a difficult profession, and the need, it's a fundamental human need. Shelter is a fundamental human need. So the idea that architects are overworked and underpaid shows that there are some fundamental structural issues with the way the profession is set up that need to be addressed. And so I'm glad that, the conversations happening in the UK, as you mentioned, are becoming louder. And I think over time, we'll take the profession back. So for example, we've talked about, top-down ownership of quality control in building procurement. This is bottom up. This fight is going to be fought by the guys in the trenches. This fight is going to be fought by the young architects doing the ridiculous overtime on weekends. When they fight, right, they'll fight management. Management will fight executive. Executive will fight the clients until everyone changes. And, this idea of I can get it cheaper down the road, right, has to stop.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what leads to building collapse. That's kind of what leads to project creep and project failure. When you think that, just because you can save a few bucks, I'm going down the road, rather than paying what you should pay. Because I can say, and I think I speak for most practice owners, I don't think any architect, or most architect owners of practices are not evil. And, if the fees are enough, will definitely compensate staff very, very well and ensure that, their well-being is well managed, they're not overworked, they get to spend quality time, relax at home, and all of that. It's all about creating the right environment. And, if we continue, so the first pressure point is the practice owner, right? Oh, you know what? I was going to pay X, but because of this, that, and the other, I'm going to pay Y, which is substantially less. And, there's not enough work in town. All right, fine, we'll do it. And so you have a situation where you reduce the amount of bonuses that can be paid on that project, not necessarily salary, but bonuses. But by the next cycle, where bonuses are like bare bone, you have to downsize, right? Because you're not going to reduce salaries yet. So you downsize, you let a few people go, and you're like, okay, fine, this is a leaner machine, we're more efficient and all of that. But those guys are going to have to do even more work. Here's where the overtime comes in, right? And all of a sudden you receive a shock to the system, a recession, devaluation of a currency, whatever it is, and you have to cut back on salaries. And in the blink of an eye, snap of a finger, it becomes a miserable experience working in that profession.
Yeah.
So we have to sort of claw our way out of it, And I think that is a fight. It's a battle that absolutely has to start from the guys in the trenches. And that's really what we're seeing in the UK. Hopefully, more and more student associations and even professional associations around the world take notes and try to apply some of those lessons.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I think I've got maybe two more questions. I think I'm going to pose to you. So we'll start with a negative. It's what is your biggest frustration about practicing architecture, and then we'll do what is the best thing.
Okay, so my biggest frustration would probably be in the architects that waste our precious, as I said, architects, sorry, clients that waste our precious, time. So we have a little slang for it here. We call them Chief Odogus. I don't know if you can say that. It's Chief Odogus. So we call them that because it's sort of like a caricature that we formed for clients that really have very little intention of executing their project, maybe don't have the resources to execute their project, but take us on this journey and waste a lot of valuable time and resources on that journey, and all of a sudden pull the rug from underneath and say, for whatever reason, this project, it's not going to fly. Over the years, we've become very skilled at recognizing these guys, almost literally on site. And we tend to avoid them as much as possible. More than anything else, I think that also from a monetization perspective, we need to mitigate against clients like that. I mean, they exist, and no matter what, every now and then you will run into one of them or a couple of them in practice. However, your design or your creative process is still your own. And if you can understand how to convert that potential energy, right, into kinetic energy or into throughput, right, to borrow factory floor parlance, is the way to go. So how can I convert that design that was abortive, that abortive project, into a monetizable form? So it could be you put together a few slides, do a masterclass. It could be you put it all together in an ebook, but don't let it lie dormant.
Yeah.
And then you can mitigate against those types of guys that are, they're there. So there's that. That's definitely a major peeve. The best thing I would say is the freedom. Yeah. So a lot of time, regardless of what one might be going through, that ability to just pick up a blank piece of paper and express yourself as an architect is very therapeutic and highly underestimated, actually. It can relieve a lot of stress. So that's a great part of it. You get to, as much as possible, create your own project and watch it come to life. And that at the other end of it is very, very rewarding. I would say those are the really high points of practice.
Well, fantastic. That was an incredible interview. Thank you so much for your time. And just thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Jason. Thanks. I look forward to our conversation very much so.
Thank you for listening. Please support the Global Architect Alliance by subscribing and sharing this podcast. please also leave a rating. For more information of what the Global Architect Alliance does, please visit globalarchitectalliance.com. We will see you next time.